Here is a stack of the 7 books that I read in February, and here are all my thoughts and opinions and ratings on the books. The very first book that I read in February is Hooked by Emily McIntyre. This is the very first book in the Never After series. This is a reimagining retelling, I honestly don't know the difference between the two, of Peter Pan and Captain Hook. I listened to this book in like 2 to 3 days. I was doing chores, coloring, eating, just whenever I had the chance, I was listening to this book. This was my first ever dark romance book, and honestly, I still don't know how I feel about this book. I don't know if I am going to read more dark romance. I don't know if this scared me of the genre, or if I'm like, I'm gonna read more dark romance. I didn't expect it to go that way, but I still enjoyed it. It was dark, it was twisted, there was a lot of violence, it was gory, there's a lot of blood and knives and murder, and that's what they mean about dark romance. Our main character is Hook. Even though Hook is like a murderer and a psychopath, he's considered as like the good guy, like our main MMC, and then Wendy is the FMC, and then Peter is our like villain in the story. There was things that James Hook would say that would have 2 childhood movies pop up into my head. Like these scenes, iconic scenes from these very popular movies pop into my head. When James was just trying to be scary, he would tell them, "Do you know?" And what would pop into my head is Shrek, the scene where it goes, "Do you know the Muffin Man? The Muffin Man!
Do you know the Muffin Man?
The Muffin Man?
The Muffin Man!
Yes, I know the Muffin Man. Who lives on Drury Lane?
Well, she's married to the Muffin Man.
The Muffin Man?
The Muffin Man!
I kept having that pop into my head, and James would say that over and over and over again. "Do you know?" And I just kept thinking of the gingerbread and Shrek saying, "The Muffin Man!" Another thing, James would keep saying, "I will end you." And it would make me think of the Cat in the Hat scene where they're doing the cooking show, where he would go, "I'll end you, and I'll make it look like a bloody accident."
Anything.
Anything.
I'll get you, and I'll look like a bloody accident. Anything. Now, let's...
Anyways, it was just a funny little thing that kept happening in my head. Our MMC is the bad guy. He is involved with like drugs. He's a really big, powerful guy. Like people are scared of him. And then Wendy is just like an ordinary girl who ends up just getting her paths crossed with James, and that's where the story ends up leading. I don't want to say too much about the story. I quite literally just can't even say it online because it's just a dark romance, but do I recommend it? Maybe if you like dark romance. My rating would probably be like a 4, and I'm a little ashamed about it. I don't know, part of me wants to rate it 2-star, another part of me wants to rate it 4-star. I don't know. Then I read Powerless by Elsie Silver. This is the 3rd book in the Chestnut Spring series. I highly recommend for you to pick up the entire Chestnut Spring series. I have read the first 3, so I can tell you that the first 3 are amazing. The 2nd book is my favorite, one of my favorite books ever. It is my favorite romance book. The MMC in the 2nd book, Kate Eaton, is my favorite book boyfriend. So this series I just adore so much. Our MMC is Jasper. He is a very famous hockey player. He's actually a gold medalist winner. He is a goalie. And our FMC, Sloane, is a very professional ballerina. She performs in the Nutcracker. The story is also childhood best friends to lovers, and I adore that trope so much. I am a simple girl. I love me a childhood best friends to lovers. From the very first page, we are getting a blast from the past when our 2 main characters are seeing each other for the very first time, and I loved it so much. I immediately was like, babe, let me tell you about this book that I literally just started. I'm on page 4, and I'm so giddy, so excited, enough that I'm like wanting to talk about it with someone immediately. And the entire story is so beautiful, so tender. Both of our characters are dealing with so much. They go on a road trip, and so it's a bit of a forced proximity. I also love the found family that's in this book. So like I said, I've read the 2 other books in the series. We get a lot of those 2 other couples in this book because they're all family, right? Well, they're not all family dating each other. That sounds bad. They're family. Their brothers are all their family. We get a lot of the characters that we've already read about, and I love it. It's also based during the winter time, so it talks about the snow, it talks about being cold, it talks about it being gloomy, and it was the perfect book to read during February as I was having the same weather outside. The spice is insane. Elsie Silver writes the best spice scenes. The best spiciest books ever have been written by Elsie Silver. I am not the biggest fan of spice, but when I'm reading Elsie Silver, I am. I would rate this book probably a solid 4.75, and if you haven't started the series, or if you're in the middle of the series and need motivation to keep on going, this is your sign. I loved this book. Then the next book that I read is The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden. I also listened to this book. I listened to this book in 2 days. The reason that I started listening to it is because I read probably 2-3 chapters when I first got the book back in November, and for some reason it was just a little slow. I was having a hard time caring about the story, and that has never happened with me with a Frida McFadden book. Usually the second that I pick it up, I can't put it down until I finish it, but for whatever reason, it definitely could have been the mood that I was in, but I just wasn't interested in the story, just wasn't in the mood for it, because the second time that I picked it up, I listened to it, seriously, in 2-3 days. I found my love for coloring like physical books and on my iPad this month, and so I think that's why I listen to so many audiobooks. Our FMC Sydney lives in New York City, but she has a few friends. She's single, she lives on her own, she has a job as just like an accountant, and she is just craving a boyfriend. She wants to have someone so bad, so she keeps going on these Tinder dates, and then one of her best friends ends up getting murdered and things end up going down. There's a past boyfriend that gets thrown into the mix. He is a detective, so as she's trying to forget about her ex, detective, the ex, is having to come in contact with Sydney because he is investigating the murder of Sydney's best friend. And while all of this is happening, we are going into past tense, so it's past and present, which I like because it feels like it keeps the story going. It makes it feel like it's not slow. The past is we're following our MMC, Tom. He's going to school. It talks about the horrible home living situations that he has. It talks about him going to school and his friends. That's all I'm gonna say. I don't even know if that really explains much, but I feel like I can't tell you what this book is. Like, I feel like I shouldn't give you more than that because it is a psychological thriller and you should just jump into them blindly because you don't want your brain to start guessing what the twists and turns are. But all I'm gonna say is I did not guess the twists and turns whatsoever. Once again, I have read another Frida McFadden book where I have not been able to guess it. At this point, I think this is my 7th Frida McFadden book, 6th or 7th, and I have not been able to guess a single plot twist in any of her books. It was a good old book to just binge, and that's what I love about Frida McFadden books. Then I also read Daydream by Hannah Grace. This is the 3rd book in the Maple Hills series. I'm very happy that I have finished the series officially. I also listened to this book, and this book has one of the best mental health representations out there, but it just taught me so much, and it made me realize that I really don't know how people's brains work, and it made me become more compassionate with people and more understanding for the way that people act. I feel like it just taught me more about mental health, and I loved it. I think it's amazing that I'm learning more and more about the way that people's brains work. Our MMC is Henry Turner. He is the captain of the hockey team at Maple Hills. Our FMC, Hallie, works at a bookstore, and she is the older sister and her family, and there's really good older sister representation in here. If you're the older sister that does everything for their family, you will be seen in this book. If you're just like an older sister period, the like society norms of you raising your siblings, like taking care of them, doing all the house chores, keeping, like being the glue in the family because you're the oldest, this will make you feel seen. In the beginning of the book, there is an author's note where it talks about how Henry isn't going to have a diagnosis. He's not going to get answers from a professional. It's to show that you can live a perfectly healthy, happy life with just learning about yourself. And the book was beautiful. It had really mature and emotionally intelligent characters, and this was a good one. I would recommend for you to read this book. I would rate it probably a solid 4-star or maybe 4.25. Then to the next book that I read. This is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I actually did physically read this book, and this book was amazing. I really thoroughly enjoyed this book. It has magical realism in this book, and it's based in New York City. So our FMC August is going to school in New York City, and she is also a server at a diner, and she lives in an apartment with these like funky, quirky roommates, and you immediately start to like these characters from the very beginning. And she is taking the Q train to and from school, and this is where she runs into our other FMC, Jane. And this is where the magical realism ends up getting sprinkled into the story. We soon start to realize that Jane can't really leave the train, like quite literally is stuck on the train, and August and Jane are just, they immediately have this spark between the two. August ends up becoming like a detective and trying to figure out like why this magical realism is happening. Why is Jane stuck on this train? Jane is someone who loves music. She has a cassette player, and she's always wearing this leather jacket, and you can tell that she is misplaced in time. Jane is from the 1970s, and so it was really cool to read about August trying to teach her all the new things that have happened. It was cute, it was fun, I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend for you to pick this book up, and I would rate this a 4-star. Then I read Out of Love by Hazel Hayes. I listened to this one, and I just have to tell you, please listen to this book because Hazel Hayes herself narrates it, and Hazel has an Irish accent. That has to be that, and no, I think it is. I love Australian accents as well, but Irish accents are my favorite. The second that I started listening to the audiobook, I was like, she has an Irish accent. And there was these things that she would say that would like scratch an itch in my brain. I love listening to the accents. Listening to her definitely like bumped a whole star because I think she did an amazing, impeccable. I don't ever use that word into my day-to-day, and the fact that I'm using it now just goes to show I think she did a phenomenal job narrating the story. It literally felt like I was sitting down with this FMC and she was telling me her story, because that's the way that it's written. It is like first person, and it is like your traditional book, but it's still different. It's almost like you're sitting across from each other on the couch and she's telling you her experience. I thought going into it was just a romance, and it is, but it's more of a woman's fiction. It talks a ton about mental health and how just people deal with breakups and anxiety and panic attacks. It had me literally coloring a flower, and I had to pause and just stare out into the distance and just have these words like seep into my brain and just like take over me. I was like, imagine the traditional timeline of a romance book, but having it switched the other way. And instead of the book starting off when they first see each other for the first time, it's the happily ever after, not happily ever afting, and it's him quite literally leaving her. We do get some of the future where she's trying to navigate being single. It goes to show how relationships are not perfect whatsoever, how human feelings are so complex and so hard to navigate, and throwing in someone who is dealing with their own things, if you aren't compatible, you guys are just going to explode. I highly recommend for you to pick this book up. I, by the end of the book, had a thought, and maybe I've had this thought before, but when I had it, it felt like it was the first time. I thought, I want to be friends with this character. I had this like longing and wish and desire that to be friends with this person, and I can't and I never will. But reading it felt like I was friends with her, and that's how I'm trying to explain that, the way that it was written. It felt like it was two girls chatting. I honestly think that I'm gonna rate this book a 5 stars. I haven't rated a book 5 stars in a very long time. This is a 5 star. I loved this book so much, and I highly recommend for you to pick it up. I hope that I gave the book justice. It truly blew my socks off. It's such a funny saying. I blew my socks off. Then to the last book that I read in February. This is Yoke by Mary H.K. Choi. It is a heavy, raw story about two sisters, Jane and June. It was so cool to read about a book where the FMC is Asian, because I don't think I've ever read a book where the FMC is Asian, and then it makes me think that I need to read more diverse authors, because it literally teaches me about different people, different cultures, different races. Jane and June have the most imperfect sister relationship. They quite literally hate each other and are the farthest thing from a close-knit, healthy relationship. Our other FMC, June, the sister, has cancer, and so we are navigating through them trying to deal with possibly losing each other after growing up having one of the worst relationships. Also talks about the relationship that they have with their mother, how emotionally unintelligent their parents are. They talk about growing up as restaurant kids, where they literally never saw their parents. Their parents were always working at their restaurant. It has such a huge topic on eating disorder. Our FMC, Jane, is bulimic. So I highly encourage you to be careful and to read the trigger warnings in this book before. This book was intense. It was beautiful. I don't think I've ever read about a character, I mean, between Out of Love and Yoke, such real characters. I feel like the dialogue that Jane was having, it felt so real, and it made me feel like the book was actually happening. And it's the way that it was written, and it's the way that the mental health is talked about. The way that the book ended, quite frankly, had me. Those are the 7 books that I read in February. Let me know down in the comments, what was your favorite book that you read in February? That's going to be it. Thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!